Welcome to The Record, presented by Catamaran Ventures and 314 Capital. Today we have the honor of speaking to Mr. Narayana Murthy. Narayana Murthy is an icon in industry, the founder of Infosys, and the creator of many good things about industry and society in this country. He certainly is a role model for all the people in this country, and he has stood up for standards of governance and good standards in almost everything that he has done in his life. Mr. Murthy, I want to start by talking about India at 75.
Sure.
India completed 75 years of freedom. And this has been a fantastic journey. We are a democracy which works well. We are 1.4 billion people. We started our journey in deep poverty as an impoverished country. Today we have come a long way. The economic model we started at the time of independence was to look at socialism. And socialism did hurt us. If you look at data, in the first 30 years after 1950, our GDP grew only at 3.5%. Population grew at 2.5%.
Correct.
At the time of independence, we are possibly the richest country in Asia, primarily because China was destroyed in the war, Japan was destroyed in the war, Southeast Asia was destroyed in the war. Of the 5 richest families in Asia, 3 were Indian. But we chose to go the socialistic way, despite being a free trade economy throughout our history. From 1980 to 1990, we grew at 5.5%, but debt grew at from 20 billion to 80 billion. And at the same time, between 1950 to 1980, we became one of the poorest countries in Asia. The world grew faster than us. Asia grew faster than us. We opened up in 1991, and magic was created. GDP went up from 275 billion to 3.4 trillion today in March 2023. A growth of 8.2% a year in dollar terms. And this growth has been unbelievably high for a country like India. Now, you've seen all this. You went to college at a time when India was a closed economy. You started your working career later, and then you started Infosys in 81. And then 1991, you saw the benefits of liberalisation. Now, if you look back upon India's history of 75 years and what you have been through, what do you think India has achieved? And what is it you could have done better?
Well, I think you gave very impressive statistics, and I'm very grateful to you. I want to look at it in a slightly different way. It is true that Nehru embraced Heraldian economics, and therefore he focused on socialism. He focused on the role of the government as the most important one. But at the same time, look at the fact that he created atomic energy. He created Bakranangal Dam. He built so many steel plants. He started IITs, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So there were a few actions that indeed strengthened India in some way. Thanks to those IITs, there's so many well-equipped engineers. So I would like to look at it that while Nehru focused on institution building in the public sector or in the governance sector, starting 1991, Sri Narasimha Rao realized that the only way India can solve the problem of poverty is through creation of jobs with good income. And he also realized that is not going to happen under the government. Therefore, he ushered in the 1991 reforms, and you are given very impressive statistics as to what it has happened. So I look at it this way. We focused on a model that really was not very good from the perspective of making India a prosperous country. However, we built a certain foundation which has become useful today. But starting 1991, we realized where we were going wrong and we have corrected it. I think, therefore, I appreciate leaders from 1947 till 2023.
Yes, we have to appreciate all our leaders because situation was very different.
Yeah.
We can't look back in hindsight.
Correct.
The point I make is, while Nehru did many good things, he suppressed private capital. And when private capital is allowed to play his role, In development, we saw magic happen from 1991. We saw Infosys come up. We saw the software industry come up. We saw jobs being created. Now, how do you see India before 91 and after 91? Because you've been through that personally. Can you tell us about some anecdotes we went through?
Sure. But before I say that, let me say one important thing, and that is the climate of opinion in the pre-1991 era, whether it was Europe, whether it was South America, Africa, all the leaders somehow had embraced socialism. Even in the UK, when I was in France in the early 70s, when Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister, he is supposed to have said, I don't know whether it's apocryphal, poverty is virtue.
Poverty is virtue.
Virtue. So, therefore, I would not want to blame leaders in India for not having been influenced by their colleagues in Europe, in South America, Africa, etc. Second, the biggest mystery for me is why our bureaucrats, who had all learned economics based on American textbooks, they did not advise our leaders. In fact, I don't know, Mohan, if you remember this. I was invited by my friend Govind Rao to give a lecture at the Institute for Social and Economic Change. I went there. Before going there, I generally prepare reasonably well. So I took an undergraduate textbook, Economics 101 textbook, in the US for certain top ranking universities. I wanted to see what those textbooks said and what we did. So therefore, I took the 18 chapters of that Economics 101 book, and I wrote on the top the summary of each chapter, and below what India did. They were exactly opposite of that.
Exactly opposite.
Opposite of that. So the biggest mystery to me is all these guys who went to the best of schools in economics, for some reason they didn't. Let me give you another anecdote. This is very important, Mohan. I don't know if you have read Ishar Ahluwalia's autobiography. If you remember, she mentioned an incident when Sachin Chowdhury, the then finance minister in June 1966, devalued the Indian rupee from 4.5 rupees per dollar to somewhere around 7.2 or something. And Ishar, being a very, very diligent student, later on she went to MIT and did her PhD, she prepared herself at home, thinking that the next morning, the day after the devaluation, the professors would argue and talk about, is devaluation good, whatever we did, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages. And she was surprised that no professor at Delhi School of Economics raised a single word about devaluation. So my argument, Mohan, while I entirely agree with you because you generally come with a lot of data, a lot of logic, we have to realize that bureaucracy, which was responsible for advising our leaders during that time, they failed to do it. So the fault lies not just with our political leaders, with our bureaucracy also.
Your life reflects the transition in political philosophy. You were ardent socialist in your youth.
Yes.
And you believed in a particular way of life. Then it turned out to be one of India's greatest compassionate capitalists. And you spoke highly about capitalism, not the kind of unbridled capitalism that could exist, but compassionate capitalism. Can you take us through what made you change and what happened to you to see life in a very different way?
Well, I think I'll combine it with your earlier question because I didn't complete your earlier question. You know, when I went to France, or before I went to France, I was a strong socialist. I was the son of a high school teacher, 8 children, very little to do with, but father was extremely proud of the country, extremely proud of Nehru, extremely proud of all the wonderful things that were happening. He would read to us every day about atomic energy, steel plants, Dr. Nangal, this, that, etc. So I was brought up on the staple diet of socialism. For me, everything that the government did was right. But then I went to France in early 70s, and I was in for a surprise. Everything was prosperous. There was clean roads. I didn't see any beggars. The trains ran on time. There was, every supermarket was full of goods, etc., etc. So then my belief in socialism started slowly crumbling. But then what I did was, on Saturdays, when I was free from my office work, I would go to Sorbonne, and I made friends with youngsters there who were studying economics, and I would listen to the capitalism people, and I would listen to the socialism people. And in addition, what I did was I went to a few other Western European countries that were developed. And at the end, I came to the 3 major conclusions. One, the only way a country can solve the problem of poverty is through creation of jobs with good income. Second, it is the responsibility of country's government to remove all restrictions to the entrepreneurs, to create more and more jobs for the people, to create some wealth for themselves and some wealth for investors, and very importantly, tax for the government. It is not the responsibility of the government to create those jobs. The third thing that I also realized was that it is the responsibility of the government to create a lot of public goods, roads, hospitals, schools, whatever it is, through, without any corruption. These were the 3 fundamental principles. And then I traveled for 11 months. I hitchhiked for 11 months. And I went through Western European nations, Eastern European nations, that is communist nations, then Israel, then Middle East, Afghanistan. Of course, I had to take a flight from Afghanistan because those days we were not allowed to go to Pakistan. So I landed up in Amritsar. So that journey confirmed my belief in what I had learned in France, and it converted me irrevocably. And now let me come back to your earlier question. Those days, Mohan, we didn't have had the privilege of you joining and adding significant value to Infosys, because you joined in 1994. But the pre-1991 days were hell for business people.
Hell for business people.
Absolutely. India was absolutely anti-business. Just to give you a simple example, there was a communication minister. That fellow was asked by some business people saying that, why don't you please give us some phones, because otherwise we can't communicate with anybody. We can't communicate with our distributors. We can't communicate with our customers. We can't import what is needed, or we can't export what is needed. He said, no. Even Prime Minister's phone doesn't work. You have to make do with whatever instrument you have. That was the mindset in the Indian government during the 80s. The second one, If I wanted to get a license to import a $50,000 computer, I had to travel to Delhi about 30 to 50 times.
30 to 50 times.
And those days, given the exchange rate, it probably cost us about $1,000 per trip. So therefore, even before I got the license, I would have paid approximately about 200% of the license value. I would have paid, I would have spent 200% of the license value. Second, because the Indian government took about 2 years to give you the license to import, if it gave, but what was happening in the US was you would get a new model of computer, which was twice the power, but the price was 30% less. Now, when I went to Delhi to get the model change, the officers, who are very honest people, good people, they advised me, no, Mr. Murthy, don't try to do it because it will take another 9 months. So the reality was, those days, India was always 3 steps behind the latest technology. Let me give you another example, anecdote. Those days, if you wanted to travel abroad for even a day or two, you had to apply to RBI because there was no current account convertibility. And some RBI clerk would take 10, 15 days and then approve or disapprove. One of my friends from Chennai, he had applied to the Reserve Bank of India and he had said, I'm going to spend 1 day in Paris. So he had asked for 2 days in Paris and 1 day in Frankfurt. Sorry, I said wrongly. So when he reached Paris, the person he was to meet on the second day called him and said, look, I can't meet you because I have to go to my head office in Frankfurt. So will you meet me in Frankfurt? The result was this gentleman spent 1 day in Paris and 2 days in Frankfurt instead of the approval of 2 days in Paris and 1 day in Frankfurt. When he came and submitted the tour report, those days we had to submit a tour report, he was asked, given a show cause notice, why did you spend 1 day in Paris and 2 days in Frankfurt as against 2 days in Paris and 1 day in Frankfurt? We can punish you if you don't give satisfactory thing. That is the joke. I can give you some more examples, but I don't know if we have time. But the reality was that those days it was hell for business. And what 1991 did was it brought about a few fundamental changes. For me, I always say that while we got political freedom in 1947, we got economic freedom only in 1991.
You're saying that emphatically.
Absolutely emphatically. And we owe it to Sri Narasimha Rao. Let us be very, very clear. Yes, Dr. Manmohan Singh was his finance minister. If the Prime Minister had not fully supported Dr. Manmohan Singh, I don't know if it would have been possible. Dr. Manmohan Singh, Sri Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and Sri P. Chidambaram. These were the 3 people that ushered in the economic freedom for India. We all should be very grateful to them. What 1991 economic reforms did were three or four things. One, in certain areas like high-tech, it removed licensing completely, which meant that the corporate leaders, instead of going and waiting in the corridors of North Block, they could take their decisions and think about strategy in their boardroom. Second, there used to be an officer called Controller of Capital Issues in Delhi. I don't think he understood capital markets because there was hardly any capital market in Delhi. The capital market was in Bombay, or now called Mumbai. And that person, he was a civil servant, rarely gave any premium when you had your IPO. We ourselves had applied. And he said, no, 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 I will give you only, you can list it at 11 rupees, while the par value was 10. And Mr. G.R. Naik and I, we went to Delhi. We went several times. Of course, those days you had to go 5, 8 times, before they saw you. And he said, no, in the past you're done, but how do we know the economy change? You may not grow that much. All of that, usual arguments. And he gave only 11. But what these architects of economic freedom did was, they realized that that office was superfluous. They abolished that office. What they said was, stock market is all about intelligent estimation of the future, truthful estimation of the future. Therefore, we would allow entrepreneurs to choose their own investment bankers and then go public at a share price that is acceptable to both the entrepreneurs and the major institutional investors, etc. That was the second thing that Dr. Manmohan Singh, Shri P. Chidambaram and Dr. Mantik Singh Ahluwalia did. The third thing they did was they introduced current account convertibility. Of course, the governor of RBI was an important player in that. The good thing about current account convertibility is that you did not have to apply to RBI and wait for 10, 12 days before you got the approval to travel. Because you know very well, you've been the CFO of an important software company. Sometimes we get 2 days, 3 days notice to travel.
Yeah.
Though earlier, before 1991, it was not possible.
Not possible.
So they realized that this is all not the right thing. So they allowed us to travel at our will, to have international credit cards. Second, to hire consultants in quality, in brand building, marketing, etc., etc., and in some ways to acquire companies also.
Yeah.
These were the three major reforms that breathed life into almost dead business in India.
So you've seen the transition from an area of darkness to more light, which enable you to grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, if you look forward to the future, Mr. Murthy, what do you think India should do now to make sure that we have a very bright future for our children and grandchildren? We have come a long way. We finished 75 years. We've done a lot. We learned from our mistakes, hopefully. And now we have the benefit of high growth. We have benefit of job creation. What should we do in the future to make sure the future is much better than the last 25 years after liberalization?
Well, I think we have been doing well economically, particularly in the last 20 years. There is a realization that compassionate capitalism, encouragement of entrepreneurship, honoring honest taxpayers, these have all been accepted. And I'm very happy that both the political leaders and the bureaucracy in India have realized that these are the good days, and therefore we have to encourage more and more of such behavior, and we're all very grateful. Now, what we need to do is, while urban India has made a spectacular progress, you look at number of cars, you look at number of motorcycles, you look at the students going to colleges, you look at hospitals, you look at restaurants, any of these, I think we have done a remarkable job. There is no doubt. However, there is an India which has not leveraged the benefits of globalization that you and I have enjoyed. And that is rural India and the urban poor. These are the two people that have not benefited. While India, as you were pointing out earlier, while Bangalore has a per capita GDP of around $11,000, as you said, the reality of India is that we have a very high standard deviation, very large standard deviation. What that really means is that the dispersion is very large, and there is a significant number of poor people in the country. I mean, the very fact that the government had to distribute
Free food.
free grains to 800 million people.
Yeah.
That's on record.
Yes.
That's not my data.
Yeah.
That says that while we, the urban middle class, and the rich have benefited significantly from all the wonderful things that successive governments have done, particularly in the last 20 years, somehow we have not been very fair to the rural people. That requires us to improve per capita GDP in rural India. As you know better than I do, agriculture contributes somewhere between 15 and 18%
Yes.
of our GDP.
Yes.
But about 40 to 45% of the people are directly or indirectly employed there. What that means, Mohan, is this, that when we say that the per capita GDP of India is approximately about
$2,500.
2,000, whatever it is, $200, $2,300, whatever it is, that is to be divided by 2.5 when you think of rural India. In other words, the rural people have a per capita GDP of approximately
$1,000.
And then add to that this dispersion due to standard deviation. That means there are a lot of poor people in India. So the only way that can happen is to shift people from agriculture to low tech.
Yes.
I mean, both rural India as well as urban poor. Now, why am I saying low tech? Because there is a reasonably large number of illiterate or semi-literates in the country today because our population is so high. Now, these people, to be able to add reasonable value in manufacturing, they have to be in low-tech industry and they have to be given reasonable compensation or salaries. So therefore, I would say we have to learn from the experiences of other countries that have used such a strategy in the 70s and at least bring it up now, saying that open up India to foreign investment and create whatever incentive they want so that they can create jobs for rural, semi-literate and illiterate Indians. And then, why am I saying that? The reality is that we have to become the most competitive nation in manufacturing and selling these low-tech equipment. Otherwise, there are countries like Vietnam and others who will eat our lunch. So my suggestion is, while we have all benefited significantly from globalization, from the 1991 economic reforms, there is a certain part of India which the government is trying to help. There is no doubt about it. But subsidy is not the way to help them. Subsidy is needed to a certain extent, but we need to create jobs for them. We need to create confidence in them. We need to say that every month I get my salary and I will take care of my children. I will take care of my parents, all of that. I think I request that our governments, both at the central level and at the state level, look at this very important issue and look at data. I may be wrong in some way. I would want to be corrected. And if I am right, to in some way address this problem. That's my wish.
So your biggest wish is that rural poor, urban poor should get jobs. There should be a transition from agriculture to low-tech manufacturing.
Correct.
And we have to make sure they get a reasonable income. Rest of the things that you need to do are being done. This is the biggest challenge for India.
Yeah.
Now, sir, let's come to the globe.
Sure.
Now, you have traveled widely. You have seen the rise of globalization in your lifetime.
Yeah.
You have met many global leaders. Today, we are at a time when there is a shift of economic power from the OECD to the emerging markets.
Yeah.
We've seen the rise of China as a major economic power.
Yeah.
We've seen the transformation of technology.
Yeah.
If you look at the world in the next 10, 20 years, where geopolitics could change because of the rise of China and the rise of Asia, where aging is happening at a rapid pace in the West, and aging could be a big issue, where climate change is a major issue,
Yeah.
and we have to solve that. How do you see the next 10, 15, 20 years for the planet? What do you see the major factors that we have to
What
address?
I would do, Mohan, you and I have done it at Infosys. It may be at a microeconomic level, but I do believe that there is some value in what I'm saying. And that is, if we can look at countries that have made significant progress in the last 25, 30 years. Why I'm saying 25, 30 years, the reason is then they would have gone through some ups and downs.
Yes.
They would have gone through some difficulties. If they can look at a country like China, if they can look at other countries that have made significant progress economically, and then say what are the policy decisions they took so that they could grow very well, then I believe that we would also grow. Second issue that we have to learn, Mohan, is somehow our youth have the habit of taking not so desirable habits from the West and then not helping the country. India's work productivity is one of the lowest in the world. Unless we improve our work productivity, unless we reduce corruption in the government, at some level, because we have been reading, I don't know the truth of it, unless we improve or unless we reduce the delays in our bureaucracy in taking decision, we will not be able to compete with those countries that have made tremendous progress. So therefore, my request is that our youngsters must say, this is my country. I want to work 70 hours a week. This is exactly what Germans and Japanese did after the Second World War.
Yes.
The German leader, he sat down with the German leaders, corporate leaders, and he said, we have to rebuild, and that's your job. And they made sure that every German worked extra hours for a certain number of years. So I hope our leaders too will be able to, when I say leaders, corporate leaders too will be able to address our youngsters and say, for the first time, India has received certain respect. This is the time for us to consolidate and accelerate the progress. And for doing that, we need to work very hard. We need to be disciplined and improve our work productivity. I think unless we do that, what can poor government do? Every government is as good as the culture of the people. And our culture has to change to that of highly determined, extremely disciplined, and extremely hardworking people. And that transformation has to come to youngsters, because youngsters form a significant majority of our population at this point of time. And they are the ones who can build our country, with gusto. That's what I say.
Now, on a global scale, how do you see change? I mean, how do you see the United States the next 10, 12 years? How do you see the rise of China? How do you see Europe? How do you see this geopolitics in your talk with global leaders, you travel around the world, you speak to global leaders, you've seen the past 50 years post-war. Now, with the rise of China, the war in Ukraine, how do you see the world today and maybe in the near future?
I'll tell you an anecdote. One that happened about 13, 14 years ago, and one that happened 2 weeks ago. At that time, I was on the board of a huge bank in London. And what I found was that over a period of 5 years, in that is, let's say around 2007, 2008, when they mentioned China 3 times in the discussion, they mentioned India once. And they mentioned US 4 times.
4 times.
5 years later, they mentioned China 30 times and they didn't mention India once.
Oh.
I was sitting
Witness to
there.
that.
I was sitting in the boardroom of a very important bank in London. Now, let me shift to 2023. I was participating in the advisory board meeting of a business school in Europe. In the conversation on the issue that you mentioned, what do you think are the changes that are happening globally? When they mentioned China about 6 times, they mentioned they mentioned US only 3 times.
Only 3 times.
3 times. What I'm saying is, Mohan, about 10, 12 years ago, US was mentioned 4 times, China was mentioned 3 times. Last month, this is not me. These are, Europeans. I was not there. And Americans. When they mentioned China 6 times, they mentioned US 3 times. I was writing down. What that means, Mohan, is that the preeminent position that US occupied in the minds of the intellectuals, in the minds of corporate CEOs, there were at least 2 CEOs from 2 of the Fortune 20 companies. In their minds, China is a very, very important player in the global context. And US somehow, it has kind of come down. And let me also tell you, nobody mentioned India.
Again, even today.
Yeah, even nobody mentioned it. Nobody. It's not me, it's they. What can I do?
We have to grow.
We have to. See, Mohan, you and I have been witness to this also. If you remember, in 1994, at the first trap or so, we had commissioned a study on unaided mind recall of emphasis at IITs and regional engineering colleges. You and I were surprised or shocked, saddened that it was 0. In other words, 0 students passing out of IITs, regional engineering colleges, all of that, mentioned emphasis as a possible job opportunity. Then what did you and I do? And Nandan and others? We said, we will change this. That required a lot of thinking. You, Nandan, Fadish, myself, and others, spending a little bit of money, but working extremely hard. Nandan and Fadish said, don't worry, we will raise it. And you said, we will make sure that every financial company, every investor will know Infosys. in 1999, just before we got listed on NASDAQ, at the same survey in January, that is our strap date, we were number one with 18% of the students mentioning Infosys. So the point I'm making, Mohan, is the solution is not to say we will shout some slogans and India will become, no. The way to do it is to think strategically, to bring the best minds in the country from whatever area they are in, and then come out with a strategy and execute it with extreme discipline, extreme hard work, and spending a little bit of money. That is what we need.
Remarkable. Now let's shift to technology. You've seen the change in technology. You've seen the impact of technology. Tell us how technology has changed the lives of people today compared to maybe 25 years ago. The various aspects of technology in health, in digitization, in our day-to-day lives. And do you think more and more technology is good for the human race?
Science is about unraveling the mysteries of nature. Is Earth revolving or is sun revolving? Though when we sit on the surface of Earth, it looks like sun is going around us. That is not the reality, right? So science is about unraveling the mysteries of nature. On the other hand, technology is about using scientific knowledge to make human beings more productive, more comfortable, provide better entertainment, better health, all of that. So therefore, reduce cost, all of that. Therefore, technology is a must for a country like India, which is an emerging country. Because when you use technology, you know better than I do, that if a teller cost probably 20 rupees per transaction in a bank, at the ATM, it would cost somewhere around 1 rupee or something like that. And on internet, this is an old data, I may be slightly different. On internet, 50 paise or something like that. So you've already reduced the cost. Second, the other day, my cook came to me and said, "Sir, your special diabetes atta is getting over. Either tomorrow or day after. So we have to order." I made him sit down and order on Amazon.
Oh, you made him order on his own.
I made him order. And he, of course, he knew very well. He's from Orissa, young man. And he ordered enough atta, because he knows how much he requires and all that, for the next, 2 months. Now, imagine the olden days when, for example, my uncle had to go from his village in Kolar district, Shidlaghatta Taluk, catching a bus and going to Shidlaghatta to buy coffee or to buy some sugar, all of that. Today, you can sit at home, and as long as you have a dongle, which will work even in a village, you can order whatever you want. Second, look at sitting at home. You can say, today I want this item for my dinner. Tomorrow I want something else, day after tomorrow. All of that. Similarly, I used to subscribe to a health website where I would get the best advice on my diabetes, on all of that. In other words, today, thanks to technology, you are in a position to provide better education. You have Baiju already, very, very fast growing, then healthcare, then you can order whatever you want, retail. All these things have happened. What that means is your productivity has improved. You can order, for example, that night when I ordered with our cook, it was 10 p.m.
10 p.m.
See, imagine the olden days, the shops would be closed. I think these are very clearly the advantages of technology. I think more and more people are appreciating this, but there's one bigger advantage of technology, and that is it raises the confidence of human beings. Let me give you another incident. You are also part of that. You are standing behind me in the queue. There, at Infosys, we all stood in the same queue in that the first canteen.
Yes.
And whether you are a janitor or the CEO or the CFO, the same queue. I was standing. It was 1995. You had installed the first ATM from ICICI Bank in our place. So I just struck a conversation with the person in front of me, the janitor. I spoke to him in Kannada. I asked him, how do you find? There was a smile on his face. He was very happy. So I asked him, why is it? What makes you so happy when I speak about this ATM? What is it that it has done to you? He said, sir, when we had the bank branch, of course, he had got the first ICICI Bank branch on our campus. When I went there, the clerk would not give me the same attention as all the suited, booted, software engineers. But when I go to this machine, whether you go or I go, it will give me the same amount of money. It will take the same time. No issue. So in other words, technology is a great leveler.
Great leveler.
It doesn't care whether you are rich or poor, whether you are educated, not so well educated, as long as you can use the machine. Whether you are from urban India or rural India, whether you are a powerful man or a weak person, doesn't matter. So technology has to be embraced by everybody. If a country like India has to overcome all its difficulties, even direct benefit transfer is an excellent example.
30 lakh crores so far.
Absolutely. And remember, corruption has been eliminated. I mean, imagine if somebody had told me 20 years ago that it is possible, I would not have believed it. Thanks to Aadhaar, I think this is an extraordinary benefit that has accrued to our Indian people. And I'm very happy that the government took it up, with a lot of enthusiasm. And I think this is very good. Yeah.
So my final question in this episode. What is your message for the youth of India in the 75th year of our freedom?
Well, in some way, it is a repetition of what perhaps said indirectly. And that is, for the first time in the history of our country in the last 300 years.
300 years?
Yeah, about 300 years. Because that's when the English people started coming, thinking that there's a very rich country here, all that muslin cloth and all of that. For the first time in the last 300 years, India has received some respect in the eyes of the Committee of Nations. It is the responsibility of every Indian, but more so the youth, to consolidate on that respect and to enhance that respect manifold. And as I have said many times before, the only way the world will respect anybody is performance. Based on performance. That's where I often used to say performance leads to recognition leads to respect, and respect leads to power. China is a great example. So therefore, my request to all the wonderful youth of this country is that realize this and work 12-hour days for the next 20 years, 50 years, whatever it is, so that India too becomes a number one nation or number two nation, whatever it is, in terms of its GDP. And remember, even if we become bigger than US, our per capita
Income will be much lower.
Will be much more than where we are today, but still be much less than the US. So therefore, there is an urgent need for our youth to focus on this. And second part is, I want them to realize that all this wonderful progress that we are talking about will come to nothing if the poorest child in the remotest village in India does not have reasonable access to education, healthcare, nutrition, and shelter. And most importantly, hope that its progenies will have a better future than itself. And that responsibility rests squarely on the shoulders of our young people. And that job is not easy. It requires a lot of hard work. As somebody asked President Kennedy when he went to address the NASA scientists in Houston, somebody asked, why do you want to go to moon before the end of the decade? As by 1969. He said, I want my country to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is difficult. And that's therefore my request to all our youngsters is, this is a big challenge. This is a tough challenge. And because it's a tough and big challenge, I want every one of them to leave no stone unturned to make this country number one country in the world. And that requires a lot of hard work, a lot of discipline, a lot of aspiration, a lot of teamwork, all of that.
Thank you, Mr. Murthy, for sharing your views on India at 75. For the record presented by Catamaran Ventures and 314 Capital. We're very grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.